Assalamu alaikum dear viewers and dear students. In today's video we will discuss about globalization. What is globalization and what are some of the factors which have contributed towards globalization, and what are its impacts or what are its positives for the world and what are its negatives or its implications for the world. So we will discuss all these things, the positives, the negatives, like the pros and cons, and what is globalization. This is what we will be discussing. The first thing which we need to keep in mind about globalization while discussing this term globalization is that it is an economic phenomenon, plus it is a social phenomenon, and it is a cultural phenomenon. So these three things combined together, they are called globalization. It is wrong to assume that this is merely an economic phenomenon, or it is wrong to assume that this is merely a social phenomenon. It is a combination of all these social, economic, and cultural phenomena. So this is how we will have to go about it. But before proceeding, the first thing which we need to understand about the globalization is to come up with a comprehensive definition of globalization. So all those three ingredients which I have just put in front of you, the social, cultural, and economic, all these three ingredients, you can embroil them in any kind of a definition of globalization, and that definition will be termed as the correct one or the accurate one. But still, in order to give you one definition which we can say that okay, this is a kind of a definition which is summing up the whole phenomenon for us. So that definition will be: globalization is the concept of securing real social, economic, political, and cultural transformation of the world into a real global community. It is considered to be the essential means for securing sustainable development of all the people of the world. So this is a definition over which we just need to ponder over for some time. We need to think about it. Like, it is a social, economic, and political and cultural transformation of the world and the world community. And the purpose of this transformation is to do good to all the people living across the world, not like just a specific community or just a few communities in the world, but all the people living across the world. This is the purpose, this is the aim of globalization, the stated goal of globalization, we should say. Now, what happened in other words, if we want to elaborate it further, so in other words, it is the movement towards the expansion of the economic and the social ties between countries. So the economic, cultural, and social ties between countries, this movement is also known as the globalization or the movement of globalization. So I think that from these diverse definitions, or these various definitions, or like these three ingredients are there in all definitions. You just go through many more definitions about globalization and you will find out that these three ingredients are there: the cultural integration, the political integration, the social integration, and the economic integration. So these integrations of the world, the integration of these three aspects of human life, that is there in globalization. And the aim of this integration is that all the communities living across the world should equally get the opportunity to develop themselves. And what are the opportunities? Like, opportunities in one part of the world available to one set of communities should also be available to other communities in other parts of the world. So this is how we think about this globalization. Now, what are some of the factors, or why we think like this about it? It is because that the world is shrinking. Why the world is shrinking, we will be discussing this in this lecture in detail, but the world is shrinking. due to many developments in the world. It is globalization. You need to keep in mind that globalization is not something new. It was there previously as well, but since the means of communication were not that developed in ancient times, so that was why this interaction among the people of the world was quite limited, and people used to live in different pockets in the world. They would not have frequent interaction with people living in other parts of the world. But now, with this advancement in the means of communication, this interaction has become quite frequent, and it is due to this frequent interaction of the people across the globe that globalization is emerging, globalization is thriving. So this is one of the factors which has contributed to the globalization. Now let's think about some of the major elements of globalization one by one, and then let's talk about it in detail, and like the pros and the cons and everything will be included in this debate which we will be discussing from now on. So the things which contributed towards the globalization or the term globalization involve, what are some of the following things, like what are the things which this globalization encompass. So these are some of the aspects of human life. Number one thing, when we talk about globalization, the integration of economies is there in this globalization. This is one aspect of globalization, that there is the integration of economies. And what do we mean by this integration of economy? Integration of economies, like the economies of different countries, now they are integrated with each other. In 2008, we have seen an economic recession, and after that economic recession, which hit the United States of America in particular, but then we saw the ripple effect of that hit of economic downward trend in the United States of America over the whole of the globe. So that was possible only because of this economic integration, that all the economies of the world are somehow integrated, and this is because of the interdependence. Now let me give you another example of this economic integration. Take the example of any big company, any big product, any big multinational. It is stationed in one country. The headquarters of a multinational might be in the United States of America or in Europe, but the production houses of that multinational might be established in China, in Myanmar, in India. So it will be the economies of India, the economies of China, or the economies of all these states which are involved in this, the economies of all those states, or all the multinational companies which are somehow involved in trade, in transnational trade, and where their manufacturing units are situated in other countries and their head offices are situated in some other countries. So the economies of both the host and the home states, they are somehow integrated by the existence of that one multinational company or that few multinational companies. So this is the integration of the economies, and it is frequently occurring in today's world because of a lot of factors which we will be discussing over here in this. And the foremost factor about is that of the advancement in the means of communication. So that is one aspect of this integration of the economy. Now the other aspect is, as I have briefly mentioned, that is the communication. It has this rapidly developed means of communication, or rapidly developing means of communications. May it be virtual communication, or may it be the physical communication, or the communication infrastructure across the seas and the land. So this communication is developing. Travel is developing, means of travels are developing, means of communication is developing, and it has contributed to the integration of the economies of the world, different economies in this world. It has contributed to that. Take the example of, for example, there is a publishing house situated in China or India, and it publishes a book or it publishes a magazine which would be read in the United States of America. So how it has become possible now? It has become possible through these means of communications. Now let me explain or elaborate it further. The draft of that magazine, the editorial staff of that magazine might be situated in Washington DC or in London. But the publishing houses, since the cost of production is quite low in China or India or Myanmar, so that publishing house, that editorial staff sitting in Washington DC or London might finalize the whole draft of magazine in soft form and then send it via email to the staff of to the publishing house situated in Asia, in any of the countries of Asia. So they will send it over here to this staff, and then they will tell them that they need the printing of this on such and such kind of paper, like such and such grammage of paper. So the publishing house would publish it, and they might even send a quality inspector or something, or their employees, some of their employees, or one or two of their employees, to monitor the whole process. And once that product is published, then the product is put into containers, and the containers are put into ships or into small containers, and those small containers are put into the aeroplanes, and they are transported back to the countries from where the order was received, to these countries, and they are then over there, they are distributed. And the money which these companies now, as a result or in return of their services, require from the editorial team, or from the country in which that editorial team of the magazine is situated, so they do not bring those that money in cash, in briefcase. They just transfer it through online banking, and the whole matter is resolved. So it has that one aspect of business which I just elaborated. It is contributing to globalization, right? It is the integration of the production of this one edition of magazine, or this one edition of magazine. Many countries have been involved in it, and to and from motion communication, virtual communication, and then the transfer of money was also made through the online banking. So this phenomena is occurring all over the world, and that is why it is contributing towards globalization. And this is, you might call it, a sign of globalization, or we will just go through the signs of globalization in the later part of this lecture. But this communication is contributing towards globalization. Then what are some of the issues in globalization? The issue of equality or inequality is there. Now, equality is the aim of globalization, but in the process of this equality, some inequality is also observed, or has been also observed. But since inequality is there, so you can take it in this term as well, since inequality is there in the world among different nations, so the globalization aims to remove this inequality and convert it into equality by providing equal opportunity to all the people living across the globe. So this is also an issue, and when we study this issue in globalization, then we either agree with it, that whether globalization has served its purpose, or it is on the right track towards its aim, or it is not serving the purpose, or it is not serving its aim. So there are debates going on among the academia, among the experts who are keeping an eye on the growth and the progress of globalization for the past few decades. So this academia, some of them are in favor of globalization. They say that yet it is serving the purpose, its stated aim, and some say that no, it is not serving its stated aim. So this debate is there. Then we have an issue of trade versus aid. Then we have this issue of outsourcing, that is also in the globalization. Again, this outsourcing is something which you take an order, like the magazine. Let's go back to the example of the magazine. So the magazine outsourced its publishing. The copyrights were there with the magazine, but it acquired services of another publishing house in another country to publish. So this is outsourcing, and this is one of the features of globalization, because in globalization these big companies, these capitalist corporate houses, they go for cheap labor, and they are in search of cheap labor across the world. Previously it was China serving their purpose, but now labor in China is no more that cheap. So now they are looking for new markets, and India, Myanmar and Pakistan, countries like Pakistan, they can be now their potential partner in such kind of activities. So but this outsourcing is there. Then exploitation is also part of the globalization, like exploitation of the labor. The cheap labor is there. The cheap labor is over there in the United States or in Europe. They cannot produce a product in that production cost in which they produce it in these third world countries like India, Pakistan, in developing countries and third world countries, because the labor is quite cheap. So this exploitation of the labor is also there, and exploitation of the countries is also there. Another thing is growth, which is quite linked with the globalization. I will try to explain some of these terms, but this is just an overview which I'm going to give you right now at this stage about these things. So another thing is that of growth, which is there in the globalization, and the growth of capitalist economies. Some say, the critics of globalization say that this is the growth of the capitalist economies, and they have their reasons for saying so, because up till now globalization has there are many countries across the globe which joined the WTO, which signed the WTO in hopes that they would also get benefits from it, but they did not. And there are many factors for that why they did not gain from it, but still they did not gain from it, and the critics of globalization criticize it, criticize the whole process of globalization for it. Then there is another issue, which is poverty. You see the developed world on the one hand, like the West, and then you see the underdeveloped world in Africa and in Asia and in Latin America. So the underdeveloped or the developing world, and the poverty is rampant. So this is also one of the issues which globalization wanted to address, or which it wants to address. So these are some of the debates which are going on when we discuss about the globalization. That is why it is not that an easy phenomenon, right? Then environmental issues are also related with the globalization, because you are trying, every country is trying to develop, to grow, for every country is striving for the economic growth. And in today's world, what is the economic growth? What does it mean? The economic growth means the rapid industrialization, the production, to produce more and more in less time, and that is why it is creating, or it is having its toll on the environment of the globe. Just take the example of this COVID-19. With the COVID-19, when every country was going into the lockdown and the international travel was minimized, and up till now it hasn't been resumed in its full flow. So what happened, that even after a few weeks, when the whole world came to a halt, we saw an improvement in our environment, and the horizons in major cities of the world, including Rawalpindi, Islamabad, the horizons were made quite bright, and clear sky was easily, was observed by many people. So that is the toll of globalization on the environment. So this toll, this is now again another debate, that how to regulate this growth so that it does not put its negative impact on our environment in which we live, because with this deteriorating environment or the environmental pollution, human beings are suffering. There are many countries in which, including China, in which problems related to respiratory system or pulmonary system, they are quite common, and it is because of this air pollution or environmental pollution, and this is an outcome of the globalization. So that is why this is an issue in which is now part of the larger debate about the globalization. This environmental thing is an issue. Then there is monopoly of power in globalization. Now, monopoly of power, usually it means that there is a market, and in the market, if there is only one producer, and which that producer or one supplier is there in the market, and that one supplier supplies to the whole market, and it does not allow any other supplier to come and compete with it. That is the simple example of monopoly. But in many countries, monopolies are defined. Like, for example, in Britain, monopoly is defined that if a company is having 25% share of the market over the supply, 25% share of the supply, so that would be known as that company would be having monopoly power. So this monopoly power is now again there in the globalization, and you can simply take the example of many issues, many underlying issues between China and the United States of America in this trade war, and it is a quest for monopoly by the United States of America or the Chinese companies, but it is a quest for monopoly over the global supply. So this global supply, these are the production houses of these countries produce the most. So now they try to have maximum share of the market by having the sole rights to provide or supply and cater the need of the people. So this is there. Capitalism, since in capitalism the only purpose is to maximize the capital, so that is one of the primary purposes of capitalism. So in capitalism, this maximization of capital is there, and there is a mad race for maximizing the capital or the money. So it is again, some critics say that globalization is just another means through which capitalism is promoted. So these are the critics of globalization are of the opinion that globalization is a means through which capitalism is promoted further. This is one aspect of it. And then culture is another aspect of globalization, like the integration of cultures. We can see it. It is everywhere that there is the integration of cultures. So what is the integration of culture? With this frequent travel across the globe, and then the virtual communication through internet, so the world has literally shrunk. People now, people can easily go and they can easily travel across the globe, and there are millions of people travel across the globe every year just because of these frequent means of travel. And then the virtual communication is there. So for example, if how do we know about this Black Lives Matter? Everybody in Pakistan now knows about it. Black Lives Matter in George Floyd, the man who was killed in the United States of America, because of this means of communication, this internet and these social media platforms. So we know about it because of this. And in the process, what happened, that a person was killed in the United States of America, but protests were occurring in all the major capitals of Europe. So why that was happening? It was happening because the culture amalgamation, and without this cultural amalgamation, it would not have been possible. So the negative impact is also felt, and the positive impact of something is also felt, and the culture is this kind of a uniform culture is given to the world. Now the whole world is like kind of feeling the same things. The vibes are almost the same. The issues across the globe are kind of the same issues, and this is because of the globalization. Like the issues of human rights in any Middle Eastern countries might become the issues of public in even the developed countries. I'm not talking about the governments, their governments, but the issues of public. Like take the example of the Iraq war in 2003, and then what happened? Then what happened in that Iraq war? That there was a million march against that Iraq war in London. So it was the issue of the people living in London. It wasn't the issue of Tony Blair, who was the Prime Minister of Britain at that time. It wasn't his issue. Like he ignored that thing. But the people were not ignoring it. So the vibes of the people matched. They were feeling for the people of Iraq. And similarly, whenever, like this is the, again, I would say this is globalization. Like take the example of the caricatures of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, which some people tried to draw caricatures, and then what happened? That protests all over the Muslim countries, protests were organized, they were held, and as a result of that, their governments were compelled, the governments in those Western countries were compelled to stop, take notice of it, and then that process has now almost been stopped. It has a full stop has been put in front of it. So this is how it is, and this is like, now they are feeling our aspirations, like they are feeling the aspirations of the Muslims, and likewise the people of other countries, they feel for the people for people living across the globe. So it is because of this globalization. Without this globalization, this cultural amalgamation might not have been possible. Now at least if we are not adopting the culture of someone else, at least we know that this culture is prevailing somewhere in the world, and we need to respect that culture if we want our cultures to be respected by them. So we need to respect that culture. Then again, another negative aspect of globalization is that since everything has been globalized, you just I have given you the examples. You just you can even sell some of your products. If you have got some valuable goods, you can sell them to some buyer sitting in another country through internet. So you can do that, and the buyer will be arranging everything, the shipping cost and everything, So that can be done. Likewise, terrorism was there in the world, but now terrorism has also been globalized. It is also a feature of globalization, because this transnational terrorism, it is occurring, it is happening in this era of globalization. Take the example of the attack of the 9/11, from where all those people, they gathered together in the United States of America, and then they organized everything, and they were taking advantage of the means of communication, and they orchestrated, or they managed to carry out that attack. So that is, terrorism is there. Then in this current era, that was about 20 or 19 years ago, but now in this current era, just look at the facets of terrorism. What is happening? It is a feature of globalization, that this globalization is there, and whatever inroads this globalization has developed in the world, now even terrorists are taking advantages of those inroads, and they are utilizing it for their own purposes. So this is also one of the features of globalization. Then one more important aspect is about the accountability in this globalization. Like there are multinational companies, there are transnational companies or multinational companies. So how would you make them accountable for their acts if a multinational company is operating from another country, the headquarters is situated in another country, and it is making businesses or making deals in many more countries, developing countries or underdeveloped countries. So how would these developing or underdeveloped countries make these big MNCs accountable? This is also an issue of globalization. So all these issues, they have been talked about, they have been pondered over in the globalization, and this globalization, the debate about globalization is kind of incomplete without taking into account all these issues about the globalization. And I have elaborated most of the things about the globalization, but there are some other aspects which I would take a break, and after the break I would elaborate those aspects too. What are some of the major signs of globalization? Now this is also a debate. Up till now we were discussing things in a very generalized form, and that was just to give you an understanding about the whole debate, what is going on, what do we mean by the globalization. But now just be a little specific now. And what are some of the signs of globalization? Number one is the increase in international trade. That is the foremost sign of globalization. Then increase in the flow of capital from one country to another country. So this flow of capital is there. That is another sign of globalization. Like almost $1.3 trillion trade is done per day across the globe. $1.3 trillion trade across the globe is done. And that is the flow of money is then there, that this money is transferred from one place to another. So this is the volume of trade done across the globe in different stock exchanges like New York, Tokyo, London, Beijing, Shanghai. So you can assume the sheer size of the trade then, if this much is the flow of currency across the globe. Then data flow is trans-border data flow is also there, and this data flow is the use of technology. Like for example, if when I record this lecture right now and when it is uploaded, it will be available all over the world. So this is a data flow, and likewise whatever is aired from other countries is available right now to us over here in Pakistan. And so this data flow is there, and not only aired by televisions but aired by different social media platform, posted over different social media platform is there, and then our communication through telephone and WhatsApp, and I don't know, there are many other applications through which we communicate with each other. So this is the data flow across the globe, across the border. So this is there is also an increase in this data flow, like people are frequently communicating with each other across the globe, and that is also one of the signs of this globalization. The internet, the telephone communication, the satellite communication, and all these things are there in the globalization. And then culture is an aspect, and we can see that, I have discussed that briefly, but we can see that there is almost the same kind of culture is developing, and the critics say there are many positives about it, but the critics say that it is the Hollywood culture is being imposed over the whole world, or the Bollywood culture is being imposed over all the Urdu speaking people across the globe, Urdu or Hindi speaking people across the globe. So this is how they perceive it. So this thing is also there, and then there is the WTO is there, and WTO is regulating. Like in one of my previous lectures, I have already mentioned about it, that there is a hegemonic stability is there. The hegemonic stability theory is there. I have also explained that thing, this hegemonic stability theory, I think in my previous class. So I have, in my previous lecture, I have already explained that thing. But this WTO is there, and the rules and the regulations are there, and this hegemon behind the WTO is the United States of America, definitely, and it is controlling it, and the WTO is working like a regime. So it is this thing is there, and that is one of the signs of globalization. Now, from our previous discussion, if we can bifurcate, so international travel and tourism, this is another sign of globalization. It is increasing, and it has been increased, and it is another sign of globalization. Then immigration is frequent these days. Before COVID, we could see that people would frequently immigrate from one country to another country, and it was quite common. So it was there. Then the global communication infrastructure has been developed, and it is being developed, and it has already been developed up to a larger extent. So this thing is also contribute. This is also one of the signs of globalization, and it is contributing towards globalization. You can call it some of the signs of globalization. Anti-globalization movements are already there in the world. Now, what are this anti-globalization movement doing? What are they doing, and what is their view? What are the views of these movements, the different movements? So number one is that they think that globalization is the promotion of corporatist agenda, right? Like it is a corporate agenda which is being promoted through globalization, and in the process they think that the individual freedom has been restricted, and the only purpose is to make more and more profit. So this is an argument which is presented against the globalization, and then they see that these corporates are these corporate entities, they are quite harsh, and or they are quite strict over the weak nations, and when they go over there to the weak nations, they exploit the resources, the labor, the raw material of that weak nation, and they are kind of promoting the agenda of new imperialism or new colonialism, you might call it. So this is that is why it is under criticism from the critics, and these are some of the points which the critics of globalizations are presenting. Then it says that it is imposing credit-based economies. Like in the era of globalization, you might see a lot of third world countries, they are under heavy debts. So these credit-based economies are being promoted. And not only the countries are under debt, but they also view it like individuals living in this modern era. These individuals are also developing a habit of using their credit cards more and more, like they do not have to pay upfront, they just use their credit card. So it is contributing to the credit based economies as well. Then in most of the country it is a credit based economies, like people will go for mortgage. So all these things, these are some of the you might call it some of the fruits of globalization for those who can pay the debts. But then those who cannot manage their debts, who cannot manage their credit cards, this globalization becomes a curse for those countries and some individuals who are taking advantages of this credit-based apparatus which has been introduced by the globalization, but then they cannot pay back. So then these individuals are also in deep crisis. So this is promoting towards, this is going, the world, they say that the world is going towards unsustainable growth. And then we saw that the result of that unsustainable growth in 2008 economic recession, that the world could not survive, and that is one of their main points when they criticize globalization, that this credit-based economy, it is not sustainable, it is unsustainable, and it will not help the poor countries or the poor people. So they criticize it like this. But then the arguments of the supporters are also very important. So the supporters present the theory of their economic theories, particularly when they call about this comparative advantage, which I think I had mentioned this comparative advantage in one of my previous talks, maybe in the previous lecture. So they talk about this comparative advantage, that okay, what is comparative advantage? If there is a comparative advantage in one product of country A, so the country A, if the country A is exporting or meeting the demands of the rest of the countries in that one product, so it means that this is globalization. This country A is going towards globalization. Without globalization, how would country A be producing one product at a lower cost and providing it to the whole world? So how would that be possible then, if there is no globalization? So this is their argument. These are the supporters, the arguments of the supporters of globalization. They are like this. Now, what are some of the advantages of this globalization? Number one is there are peaceful relations in globalization. Countries will be, since they will be trading with each other, so they will not go to war with each other. Take the example of European Union. Now they are trading with each other, and these enemies like France and Germany, now they are friends. They have not, they do not have even border restrictions. There is free movement across the borders of France and Germany, like in the whole of European Union. But just to make you understand this point, take the example of France and Germany, because they were enemies. So it is improving, or it is promoting peaceful relations of countries. Another thing is that with globalization, it is said that employment, opportunities of employment will be produced, will be increased. So yes, it is true that opportunities of employment have been increased, but then the critics, they also say that this is, the job security has been minimized. So criticism is also there. But opportunities of employment have been increased as countries or multinationals are putting their production units in many countries. So they are providing at least opportunities of job to the labor of unemployed laborer of or unemployed people of those countries. So it is producing that. Then another thing is that education is also being promoted as a result of the globalization. Number one thing about the education is that travel in itself is an education, and your exposure towards a lot of information is in itself an education. But educational opportunities are also being improved because of the travel, and people can now frequently travel from one country to another country, and they can either get themselves educated over there in other countries, or as a result of the improved economies, now they can focus on the education of, in the poor countries, they can focus on the education of their next or upcoming generations, because now they not only have the means to provide them the education, but as a result of the globalization, they have been sensitized enough about the education that now they consider it really necessary to provide education to their loved ones, or their kids, their children, their offsprings. And another aspect is that due to globalization, different universities have opened their campuses in many countries. Take the example of Pakistan. There are many international school systems operating in Pakistan. So this is an outcome of globalization. This is one of the outcome of globalization. So this education has been improved. They say, like, take the example of Paktar School, take the example of many other schools, international school systems. So these are the advantages of globalization. the proponent or the advocates of globalization say that these are the advantages of globalization. Then the quality of the products have been improved. Previously, without competition, like in globalization, there is liberalization of trade. Liberalization of the trade means that trade barriers are removed. So when trade barriers are removed and a high quality product is imported in a country, so people will definitely buy that high quality product. So if previously a low quality product, the same item in low quality was being produced by the local manufacturers, now the local manufacturers will try to compete with the quality of that imported product, and they will have to improve the quality of the product. So definitely competition is there and the quality of the products is being improved. This is one of the aspects of globalization, one of the benefits of globalization. Then another benefit of the globalization is that the prices are cheaper since competition is there. So every every company, every production house is trying to minimize its cost of production, so that the product is available at a lower price in the market, and then people will go for a high quality product on a lower price. So these cheap prices are also an outcome of globalization. Communication, these means of communications have been developed, and since it is a necessity of the globalization, so the advocates of globalization or the admirers of globalization say that all these things which we see now, like in the past 1 decade, these smartphones and everything, these means of communications have exponentially improved, and they say that it is as a result of this globalization, that this was the means, this was the demand of the time, and that was why it was improved. Like every time a person would not be able to go and inspect a product in another country, but with these modern gadgets, these means of communications, now he will be able to observe his to inspect all the things situated in other countries through these means of communications. So this is again, you might call it an advantage, or this is a dividend of globalization which it has given to us. Then take another example, like online monitoring of a product which is being manufactured. So if a country is if a company is having a production unit in several other countries, so it will be now these modern means of communication, they allow that company or the director or the CEOs or the board of directors of that company to monitor everything online. What are the laborers doing? What are the management of that particular production unit? What is that management doing at that point of time? So they can monitor everything, and all these things have been developed. The admirers of the globalization say that all these things have been developed to cater for the demands of the modern day trade, and it is because the world was changing, globalization was there. So definitely now different means are adopted, different things, innovation is being brought even in the existing technology to make it more feasible for those companies who want to trade across the globe. Then means of transportation have been improved exponentially. You can see that, what is this, why this CPEC, why this road and belt, these things are needed, these corridors, economic corridors are needed. They are needed to minimize the time from the point of manufacturing to the point of delivery. So these means of transportation have also been improved as a result of globalization, since it is now the requirement of globalization that there should be fast means of transportation as well. So these means of transportation are also being improved. They have been improved exponentially, but they are being taken to the next level now, and they will be taken to further higher levels in future. We can see that. Then the GDP growth, or the GDP of the whole world, has been improved or increased as a result of this globalization. So this is also another dividend of the globalization, that people are now earning more. There is money is being spent more on by the people. Previously they would not spend money, but now they earn more and they spend more, so the money is circulated and the GDP is increased as a result of it. So this is that. And then this free trade policy is there. So with the free trade, people are benefiting from the technological advancement or a high quality product manufactured in another country. That high quality product can now be available to the people in other parts of the globe because of the free trade on a lower price. So this is also one of the benefits or the dividends of globalization. Then travel and tourism have been improved. So with tourism, we have this hospitality industry that is also rapidly improving now, and there are many jobs related with it, and people are earning from it, and that is because of the globalization, that people frequently travel across the globe. So travel and tourism have been improved. This industry has been improved. Then what are some of the disadvantages? This is also very important, the disadvantages. Like number one disadvantage of globalization which we can think of is that health hazards, which are quite common these days. One example, while I was discussing the environmental issues, I just gave you that one example about globalization. But apart from that one example, just take the example of previously it was HIV or other pandemics which spread rapidly because of the frequent travel of people across the globe. But now take the example of this COVID-19, how rapidly it spread across the globe. And had it not been for globalization, it would not have spread that fast. But since it was globalization, people were frequently traveling across the globe because it was their requirement to be there in China at one time, and then on the next day they should be there in Tokyo, on the other day they should be in Seoul, and then they should travel to the United States. And so it was the nature of the trade which compelled people to travel frequently across the globe, and then they transmitted this virus. So that is why it spread. The spread of the virus was quite frequent, and this is a health disadvantage. Apart from that, one disadvantage which is related to the environmental issues which I mentioned a few minutes ago. But this one, the spread of pandemics, this is also one of the aspects, one of the disadvantages of globalization. Then while discussing the culture, that was the positives of the culture, like we understand the cultures of other and they understand our culture. But a disadvantage of globalization in the eyes of many people is, one of the disadvantages of globalization is that the local cultures are being overshadowed, and they are kind of being eliminated with the passage of time. There will be no local cultures, but just one dominant culture, and that culture would be inspired or acquired from the West, or inspired by the culture of the West. So this is also a very powerful argument, that the local cultures are being overshadowed. They are on the verge of distinctions. In many parts of the globe, they are on the verge of distinction, the local cultures, and only one culture is being imposed, because globalization, if you can see, globalization is almost 25 years old. This major phase of globalization after the signing of the agreement of the WTO, so it is almost 25 years old, and a whole generation has born with this globalization, and it has reached to its youth, to its adulthood with this globalization. So they do not know about their culture. Whatever they are seeing on the television is the Western culture, and it is all over the world that the Western culture is being promoted. So that is why the critics of globalization say that local cultures are being overshadowed by the globalization, and it is not good. They term it as one of the disadvantages of the globalization. Then there is the uneven distribution of wealth in the world. As a result of the globalization, the rich countries are becoming more and more rich, and the poor countries are becoming more and more poor. So that is also a criticism which is being leveled against globalization by its critics, and it has got its merits as well. So these are some of the issues of globalization. The conflict is also prevailing in an outcome of the globalization, because of you can see now the conflict, the trade, as a result of the trade war. The United States and China, they are now in quite a confrontational mode with each other, and the core of this confrontation is there in their trade disparity or their trade rivalry. So and that trade rivalry, again, it is an outcome of the globalization. At the start of this millennium, China signed the agreement of the WTO, and it became part of the WTO, and then it took advantage from the rules of the WTO, and it developed rapidly. So now since it is growing, companies in the US and the US itself, it is feeling threatened from the growth of China. So now that growth, which was an outcome of the globalization, China utilized it really well for itself, but now that can become a cause of a conflict. So this is also a criticism leveled against the globalization by its critics. So my dear students and dear viewers, these were some of the major aspects of globalization. What do we mean by globalization? This is what we discussed in this lecture. Then what are some of the major debates going on in globalization, and what are some of the aspects of human life which are incorporated in this globalization? So in the first part of my lecture, in the first 20-25 minutes, I was just going through all those parts, and then later on I discussed some of the signs of globalizations. What are the signs of globalizations on the world stage, and then what are the advantages and the disadvantages of globalization. I hope this lecture would prove quite helpful for you. Inshallah, see you in the next video with a new topic. Up till then, take care. Allah Hafiz.